There we go. At least it's running.
Yeah.
Let's see if it's going. Now, I'm just going to start by asking some questions. Where are you from originally?
Where did I enlist and all from?
No, where are you from? Where's your hometown?
Oh, I was born in Richmond, but I've lived here most of my life in the district.
In D.C. Okay. How old were you when World War II broke out?
1941, I was 21 years old.
You were 21 years old. What were you doing?
Machinist at the Navy Yard.
Machinist at the Navy Yard. All right. Now, when the war broke out, what did you do?
I stayed working because they wouldn't turn me loose, as far as that goes. But as soon as the Air Force dropped its requirements for college education, I enlisted.
When would that be?
September 42.
So you enlisted in 42. All right. But you were held from enlisting by the government then because of your job you were working.
Naval Gun Factory.
And you enlisted in 1942?
September 42.
September 42. Where did the Air Force send you to begin with?
Went from here to Miami Beach for indoctrination or whatever they call it. Actually, it was just a holding area. I went from there to San Antonio, Texas, to the Cadet Center there. It was classification center, they called it, on one side of the road, and the Cadet Center on the other side of the road. At the classification center, you took all kinds of tests, and you laid around, you took more tests, both physical and mental and everything. And that's when you, and coordination, the whole bit, that's when you were rated pilot, bombardier, pilot, navigator, bombardier. Pilot was the highest rating, navigator, and then bombardier. And if you didn't qualify for any of those three, then you went back into the enlisted ranks of the Air Force. Then a lot of us qualified for all three, and we actually could have had our choice. Well, of course, most everybody wanted to be a pilot. Then after that, I forget the number of weeks we were there, probably 6 weeks. Spare time, you picked up rocks off the prairie and did PT and got shots and people were passing out and all that sort of thing. Then we went from there to the Cadet Center, which was across the road, which is Lackland Air Force Base now. And that's when you took all your ground school classes, or your first. We took them all the way through cadet training. But you took your ground school classes, you drilled, you marched, you got basic military courtesy and stuff. And I had all of that previously, and a bunch of us had. So we got along pretty easy with that.
Why did you have it previously?
I had it in the Washington High School Cadets.
Oh.
And I knew all the drill, the manual of arms, and I was a cadet officer, and I was used to giving orders to companies and battalions and regiments even, and so forth. And then I went from there to primary school in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, which was a civilian-operated facility taken over by the government. And all of our instructors were civilians. And our check pilots were military. But our civilian pilots were some of the hottest pilots I've ever seen in my life. They were former crop dusters, private pilots that were a little bit crazy, and this is God's honest truth. They were the hottest pilots I ever saw. My instructor pilot, and another one in particular, had flown just about everything that had wings at some time or another. He was a year younger than I was at that time, and he could scream loud over the Gosport tubes, which they had from front to rear cockpit, fitted in your helmet, and he spoke into a tube, or he could blow in it and blow your eardrums out. He was mad. We were flying PT-17s, a Fairchild, low wing, fixed gear. And these guys were just good. I mean, they were good. And, of course, oh no, I'm sorry, let me go back. We went from Miami Beach to the University of Florida. for cadet training there. They had a cadet program, CTD they called it. And we were at the University of Florida for, there again, numbers of weeks escape me right now, but for quite some time. And we went to all kinds of, in fact, we took the freshman year, college freshman year studies. We had English, we had physics, we had the whole bit. In fact, our physics professor was also an expert on aviation engines. I mean, he was good too. He had been a mechanic in his time, and he knew engines like crazy. And then we went to the Cadet Center and so forth. And after Pine Bluff, which was a Grider Field at Pine Bluff, Arkansas, it was a great town for cadets. People loved us. They had things set up for us, the USO and things, and they'd invite us to their homes for dinner, and everybody had girlfriends and the sort of thing that you would go for dinner. And you were flying cross country. After bed, you were doing acrobatics, and that's when you first soloed was there. And at University of Florida, we flew 10 hours in Cubs, and I got sick 10 times.
You got airsick all 10
I got
times?
airsick all 10 times and threw up all 10 times. Got so they'd come back and land, the instructor would taxi right over to the hose, and I'd get it and wash the side of the plane off. Until I got sick, I did fine. Went to primary training. The first 3 times in primary, I got sick. It was only after I passed my first check ride, I didn't get sick anymore. I went to basic, I got sick my first time in basic. After that, I didn't get sick anymore. I went to advanced school flying twin engine. I got sick the first time there because he had me retracting the gear on a hot summer day with my head bent down practically under my seat, cranking the gear up. And after that, I never got sick in an airplane again. And the doctor said it was all psychological. It was just tension. I was trying too hard. It wasn't emotion or anything. It was just, I was too tensed up. Because after I graduated, I never got sick in an airplane again.
Had you ever flown before?
I'd flown one time an old Ford tri-motor when I was up at the National Rifle and Pistol matches in Ohio, at Camp Perry, Ohio. And we took a ride in the old Ford tri-motor out over the lake for about an hour, and that was it. But I'd always wanted to fly.
Okay, that's the
I
point.
saw Lindbergh on my father's shoulders coming up Pennsylvania Avenue when he came back from Paris. And my 2 overwhelming ambitions had always been to be a pilot and to be an Army officer. And I read everything under the sun that was printed on aircraft. I used to buy all kinds of aircraft magazines, Bill Barnes Air Trails. In fact, I have about 9 issues of that magazine bound in 3 to a volume. I had an aunt that was worked in a bookbinder, and she bound these for me.
Oh.
And they are really interesting to look back and see what was a hot fighter planes then, you know, and the PT-20, Boeing P-26 was new. That was our first line hot fighter. The Martin bomber was the hot bomber and so forth. They were still flying a lot of twin engine stuff. And so anyway, I went from primary to basic, which was at Independence, Kansas. And we flew BT-13s and 14s there, which was there again, a fixed landing gear, low wing plane with all metal coverings. And a little bit hotter, a little more, it had radio equipment. And, it had a radio compass in it, I think, and, you know, more refinements. And you got more acrobatics, you got more cross country, you got your first night flying, and so forth. And then I went from there to Frederick, Oklahoma, which was just across the Red River from Texas, from Shepherd Field. And I flew UC-78 to recall, which was a Cessna twin engine.
Is that the one that nicknamed the Bamboo Bomber? There was one twin engine, I don't remember which one it was.
I'm not sure. I don't know that during the war that I ever heard that term, but it could very well be. It was
About how many hours had you accumulated by the time you got to advanced? There was a set number of hours for basic?
oh
primary?
yeah, there was. I don't really recall what they were, but we flew longer and longer flights as your time went from basic to advanced and so forth. You were flying longer, more cross country, more navigational flights, more night flights, instrument flights, and so forth. And in fact, you started instruments in basic, where they put the hood up, and then in advanced, and they used to put the colored plastic on the windows, and wear the goggles and black out. And that was at the time then in advanced school when you made your choices of what you wanted to fly when you graduated. And my first choices were A-20s, B-25s, and then troop carrier. I didn't put down 4-engine bombers at all. Of course, that's what I wound up in.
Why didn't you didn't want to be a fighter pilot?
No,
You didn't?
no. I had no desire to be a fighter pilot for some reason.
Ah,
I never was really that good at acrobatics, to be honest. I could do all of them, but I could do a mean snap roll. But a slow roll, I'd fall out of split S over half the time. And Immelmans I could do, and loops, you know, all that sort of thing, spins, that's no problem. But I just, like some of the guys, that's all they thought about was doing acrobatics. I could do them and I did them, but I wasn't that wild about them. It was just, I don't know, I guess I wasn't cut out to be the hotshot fighter pilot.
when were you awarded your wings? Eventually you got...
43, class of 40, 43? 43 or 44D, I've forgotten which it was. My memory for dates and
Oh, well,
names
that's
is not so
okay. I don't
great,
expect you
but,
to after a number of years.
but I think it was in, I'm just trying to think, I guess it was 44D. Yeah,
And that is after you finished what, advanced?
advanced.
Advanced, all right. And from advanced they sent you to...
I broke my foot in advanced school playing
Oh.
basketball.
Oh.
And I was held back for the following class. And if you don't think that didn't break my heart, boy. I was one sad cookie when they put me in that hospital and they told me I wouldn't finish up and graduate my class. And when I finally did that, get out of the hospital, you know, I was sitting around because I'd had most of the ground school. I'd had all the flying. And all I did was just kill time until time to graduate. And I didn't know most of those guys. I mean, I know some of them to speak to, seen them around. But I really didn't know them well, not like my class that I'd been all the way through with. In fact, one night, 2 of them came back in the barracks, and I was laying on my bunk. And somebody at the front of the barracks yelled, "Attention!" These 2 second lieutenants walk in. And I started to get up, and I saw they were, I said, "Oh, right." I laid back down on my bunk. The guy next to me said, "Hey, get up, there's 2 officers." I said, "I know those 2 clowns." "Where's Crouch?" I yelled. I said, "I'm over here." And this fellow was a guy named DeSanto. He was from Pittsburgh. Joe DeSanto. And I said, "I'm over here, Wop. Come on over." They came over and had a bottle. They brought it over. We sat around drinking and talking. All these guys said, "Gee, he's sitting there drinking with 2 officers, you know." Well, anybody with wings in a bar, you know, was a little god until you got them. And even then, some guys thought they were.
Yeah.
But I think it was 44, early 44 when I graduated. And then I went, that was the first time I had to leave home since I'd been in. And I came home on a delay en route. Got home, got tonsillitis. I couldn't even swallow a strand of spaghetti. They put me in Walter Reed Hospital for 2 days. and finally got rid of the tonsillitis, and I sent a request to the new base, which was Liberal, Kansas, asking to delay that I'd been in the hospital. And you get the letter back, report this station, date ordered. So I lost 2 or 3 days of my leave. It was a 7-day delay en route, I think. So I really had about 4 days at home. And so then I went to Liberal, Kansas, and that was transition school into B-24s.
In the B-24s. You started flying B-24s then?
Yeah.
Right away. I was talking to you the other day, you said something about B-25s. When did you fly them?
I flew B-25s overseas.
Oh.
And then I flew B-25s after the war.
Okay, but you went from 4-engine back down to 2-engine.
Yeah.
Oh.
No problem. I was checked out and I'm overseas by a friend of mine who was flying B-25s. And I flew B-25s, half a dozen times over there. But then I flew back here at Chinook Field and Bowling and Andrews and Ellington and so forth.
What was your first impression when you saw the B-24? I didn't know you'd seen them before, but I mean up close when you got in it and sat in it.
I don't really know. I know what my first impression was when I flew it.
Okay.
Handling the thing was like handling a damn Mack truck. I thought I never would be able to force that thing around. It seemed like it took all the strength in my arms to turn that yoke, to pull it one way or the other. And I thought, oh, this is going to be the worst thing in the world, flying this big boxcar. And of course, like I told you the other day, I got so after a while, I could sit there and roll it around with one hand like you drive a sports car. I mean, it was just, because the controls were all servo-assisted anyway. But, and it was, forget taking that thing off for the first time by myself. And I had to pull back on that thing. I thought I never would get it far enough back to get it off the ground. But it was a nice aircraft. It was not a quirky aircraft. It didn't have a lot of faults. And it was steady. It wouldn't get up to altitude without a ladder. And but anything below 14,000, 15,000 feet, it was a good aircraft.
Lost a lot of performance and above that? Simply wouldn't handle it?
It just wouldn't climb. See, it had a Davis wing, which was a high-speed wing at that time. And it just wouldn't climb very fast, and it labored. We flew at 20,000 feet some in RTU, or OTU, but other than that, no.
How long did they give you to transition? How many hours in the B-24?
We must have had, let me see. Must have had 3 months here.
3 months. And when you finished your introduction transition to the B-24, where were you assigned?
Out to Muroc Army Air Base in California, which is Edwards Air Force Base now. That was the OTU. And that's when you knew which way you were headed, Europe or Pacific. We knew we were headed for the Pacific when we went there because all the planes there had been brought back from the Pacific, or at least most of them. And all the instructors had been pilots back in combat there. And that's where you got your crew. That's where you were assigned your crew. They took us all on a great big auditorium, or a number of us. I don't know, it was all the pilots at one time or not. I guess maybe it wasn't. And they had all the gunners. And you never seen any of these guys before other than the ones you came out with. And they call the first pilot's name, they call my name, and then they call another officer, that's my co-pilot. And then they call two more officers, and that's my navigator and my bombardier. And they all go and stand with you, or sit with you, I forget whether we were standing or sitting at that time. And, you know, nobody knows anybody else, and you're trying to get first impressions, you know. And then they assign your 6 gunners. There was your engineer and your radio operator, and your engineer was always your crew chief, and that as opposed to a ground crew chief. Mm-hmm. He was always your aero crew chief. And then one of the gunners was later assigned as a radar operator, but then he took that training while we were there, because the radar wasn't that great then anyway, but it did work to an extent. And one was your armor gunner.
Now, what's an armor gunner?
He was supposed to be the one that knew the most about your guns and bombs.
Okay.
I mean, it's as simple as that. And it was up to him usually to make sure that you got your amount of ammunition aboard overseas and this sort of thing. But I don't know that he ever even checked on it, because the armor people from the squadron usually took care of that anyway. And the other two were just regular gunners. There was a ball turret gunner, your tail gunner, your nose gunner, top turret gunner, and 2 waist gunners. And a lot of the B-24s we had out there were old D models with the plexiglass nose, and then we had the H's when they first put the turret on the nose, and we had 1 or 2 J's, which is what we flew in overseas. And that out there was when we that's when your crew meshed.
Mm-hmm.
That's when your crew had to mesh. Now, show you how things changed. My ball turret gunner was a great big guy, about 6'2".
Good grief! You're gonna put him in the ball turret.
And he used to have to go in the ball turret. Well, we were on an air-to-air gunnery mission one day, and we put the ball turret down with him in it. Now, I don't know whether you're familiar with the ball turret, but ball turret on 24 came up into the plane.
Mm-hmm.
He gets in, there's a wide strap that goes across behind him, that's hooked to either side, and that's what he leans against. And then behind that, there's a door that fits to make the complete ball. And one of the other gunners always put that on and closed it. Well, they let the ball down, and we're having P-39s, I think, coming on air-to-air passes against us. And the door falls off of that ball turret while he's suspended down, because most of the time he was, in other words, on his back. He could keep the guns level. And all he's got supporting him between there and the ground, because they didn't wear parachutes in there, was this strap. And it scared him so bad, he swore he'd never fly again. The last we saw of him, he was behind the quartermaster's counter at the base, passing out clothing. But I was assigned another ball turret gunner, and he was a little guy, and he fit in there like crazy, and he fit into the crew very well too. He was a kid from Texas that was a real operator. And we'll forget when we went overseas, he had all these families sending big boxes of junk jewelry he was going to trade to the natives over there. Well, the natives weren't exactly that, but that's the type he was, but he was a good gunner. And then my bombardier, just before we were ready to ship out of Muroc, had to go on emergency leave. His wife had a baby, and the baby was very badly deformed.
Oh.
And the baby and her life was very critical for a while. They both lived, so then we had to be assigned another bombardier. They used to always say bombardiers were the laziest men in the Air Force, because most of them were frustrated pilots that had made it, and so they figured, well, they would just go through the rest of the time. But both the bombardiers I had were good bombardiers. I mean, they could do their job. Outside that, they weren't worth much. I mean, irresponsible as a devil. But we picked up another one when we went up to Hamilton Field in San Francisco. And he had been on another crew, and he had been taken sick or something. The other crew had phased on through and had left him, so he had to be reassigned. But that's what RTU was. Your crew had to mesh, and you got your first air-to-air gunnery, your air-to-ground gunnery. First time you had guns on anything, you know, let's face it.
But what is RTU?
OTU.
OTU, excuse me.
Operational Training Unit.
Operational.
And they trained you in the way things were done over there. And you flew long flights. And you flew a lot of long night flights. And you flew long over flights where your navigator had to navigate. And you had to follow his navigation and not look down and see a road junction or a city or something. And then you dropped bombs, practice bombs, and you got training on the Norden bomb site. Everybody on the crew got training on that, but of course not as much as Bombardier, and who were already trained on it, but they kept them on the simulators. And all this time you had a lot of link time and so forth. And it was just to get you ready for an operational unit. And all the thing was that.
Yeah, when did you leave to go overseas?
I left Muroc the day after New Year's. And we went from there to Hamilton Field in San Francisco. And I never did really understand what the devil that was for. And then we went from there to Seattle. We were only in both places about 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. In fact, we were in Hamilton Field, I guess. Yeah, about 3 weeks. And the same way in Seattle. Then we went over by ship.
Oh.
And the first night out of the harbor, we ran into a big fat storm, the worst one they'd had on the coast for years. And all of us, the officers, were up in the bow compartment. And the anchor lashings broke loose that night. And all night long, the anchor's banging up against the side of that ship. And I was afraid it was going to sink, and I was afraid it wasn't going to sink. Because I was laying on my bunk, and every time I got up, I got seasick, along with a lot of other guys. And I stayed in my bunk for about the first 5 days. I subsisted over peanut butter and crackers. I'd put a big box of crackers and a big jar of peanut butter in my barracks bag. And the guys would bring me back bread from the galley. Every time I would get up, I would get sick. As long as I stayed in my bunk, laying down, I was fine. But finally one day they said, come on, you got to get up and go to the chow hall. It'll make you feel better. So I went down to the galley. This was on a attack transport we were on. And they had corned beef and cabbage. And to watch that stuff sliding around in my plate, I said, forget it, back to my bunk. And we were stacked three deep, three stacks of bunks. And the little guy was a navigator on one of the crews, and the next bunk to mine, he went out on deck, and coming back, he got his hand caught in the watertight door slammed on it. He mashed the daylights out of his fingers. He never did get out of his bunk until we got to Hawaii. But I finally did get out on deck when it got warm, and I could lay down out on the deck. And and it was fine. I did go out one day to see a storm at sea. The second day at sea, I did go out on deck because I was determined I was going to see a storm at sea. And it was everything that the newsreels had showed it to be, boy. On the bow of that ship, I was looking up at the tops of waves. I was looking down at the bottom of waves. And there was nothing but these huge, big waves as far as the eye could see. And I thought, good God, this is awesome. But I never will regret that I went out there. That was a sight to see. Because all I'd seen before was on newsreels, you know,
Yeah.
in the movies. So we went to Honolulu. And they flew us from Hickam over to Kauai. And we were at Barking Sands Army Air Base in Kauai. And I don't know whether you want me to digress a little bit, but
Go ahead.
Barking Sands Army Air Base got its name from the sands there that at night were supposed to make sounds when the wind hit them just right or so, like a dog barking in the distance. And I've heard the sound. Well, we had a good old time there. I mean, we went all around the island, and this 2 years ago this summer, my wife and I went back to the islands for the first time that I'd been back. First time she'd ever been there. And we went to Kauai, and I said one day, my brother-in-law and my wife and I were together, and I said, let's drive up and find Barking Sands. I said, I just want to see what's up there, because it was on the map. So we drove up there. Finally got to the end of the road, and it was a hot, hot day. And there's a sign, Barking Sands Beach. Well, it was just a dirt road. I'm in a rental car. I said, forget it, I'm not going up there. Well, we passed the gates to the Pacific Missile Range, which is a highly classified facility over there, run by the Navy. And on the way back, I said, I'm going to stop in here and just ask the guard what's up at Barking Sands, if there's still anything up there. So I pulled up to the gate, and I told the guard, I said, I realize that I can't go in. That's a restricted facility. I said, but could you tell me what's up at Barking Sands? He says, sand. I said, yeah, I know. I said, but there used to be an Air Force base there during the war. I said, I was just wondering if there's anything up there. He said, were you stationed there? I said, yeah. He said, well, this is it. I said, what do you mean this is it? He said, this is where Barking Sands Army Air Base was. Pacific Missile Test Range took it over. The Navy took it over. And he pointed to a little cinder block shack over on the other side of the drive, and he said, go in there. He said, there's a guy in there. He said, he'll want you to register if you've been stationed here. And so we went in, and this man, I think he's a retired sergeant, and he has a book for you to sign if you've ever been stationed there. And some of them were Navy names in there, you know. And I looked through it, and I saw several names of guys in my group that had been there and had signed the book. And he had a bunch of pictures in the back of photographs taken of the time that the Army Air Force had it and the time the Navy had it. And I really thought that was really neat. I really did get back to Barking Sands. And while we were at Barking Sands, General Harmon, who was Commander-in-Chief Far Eastern Air Forces, went down in the Pacific between Kwajalein and Johnson Island, flying back from Kwajalein. And they put on a big search mission for him. And they stopped the Saratoga, I think, and all kinds of Navy vessels. They had troop carrier planes, they had B-25s, they had 24s, they had C-46s, they had everything that could, PBYs, PBMs, all searching the area. And so they sent some of our crews up, and I had a brand new B-24 that had 16 hours on it when we took it. And we flew it up to Johnson Island. Well, Johnson Island was about 6 feet above sea level, nothing but a coral atoll run by the Navy. It had one runway, 6,000 feet long. That was from one end of the island to the other. A taxiway went around to your left at that time with prevailing winds. You went around, and everything was in between that taxiway and the other end of the runway. The maintenance sheds, the Navy headquarters, the Navy quarters, Old Navy Officers Club, the dispensary, all this stuff was inside of that area. So we were flying search missions out of there for General Harmon. And I mean, these were long search missions. We were using a Bombay tank to stretch our fuel out. And they would brief you every night, and you were flying a grid pattern and so forth. So about the second day, I guess it was about the second day, we were at about the end of our pattern, starting back, and we switched to the Bombay tank. And all of a sudden, one engine cut out. And then another engine cut out. Well, B-24 would barely stay airborne with two engines. It would begin to lose a little altitude. Three engines, you could fly a long way. So then one engine cut back in. Well, in the meantime, my engineer is down there. He's checking the fuel transfer and everything, you know, trying to find out what's wrong. And then alternately, one to two engines would cut out, but we were beginning to lose altitude. So my radio operator put out a mayday, and these what do they call them? PB2Y2s.
PBY too.
No, not PBY. This is it was the Navy version, the privateer, the Navy version of the B-24 with a single
the privateer.
tail.
Yeah, the one with the big high tail on it.
PB4Y2, I think. Yeah, PB4Y2, I believe is what it was. Well, two of those came out and met us. And one of them went up to about 10, 12,000 feet for a homing beacon, and the other one stayed on our wing. And we were losing altitude, and we started throwing stuff out. And we were still losing altitude because we were flying then on two engines. And we got down to within, I would say, about 50 feet of the water. And I'm looking at wave, crest, and everything else, figuring I'm going to have to ditch a sucker. And everything I'd ever had in all these ground school courses about how to ditch in the ocean and down in the trough and miss the crest and all this bit was flashing through my mind. And finally, third engine cut in. We maintained our altitude. Then the fourth engine cut in, picked up a little altitude. Then another one cut out. So we flew back in on three engines. And we made a straight-in approach to the field. As we turned off onto the taxiway, two more engines cut out. We taxied right up to the maintenance stand, which was oil and tar coral surface by the maintenance shed, and that was right across a little hill and a road from the fire department. And so they checked it over, and, you know, I went to the meeting that night, and the Navy command, who was the CO of the island, he looked up when my co-pilot and I walked into the room, and the old Navy thing, you know, glad to see you aboard. And if I hadn't read that, I wouldn't know what he was talking about. I read books that said, where they, you know, said that. That's a real snappy. I said, oh, glad to be aboard, sir. I thought that was pretty neat, but dumb. But they found that the Bombay tank had a leak in it. That was causing a vapor lock.
Oh.
So next morning we were due to fly back to Hickam with the new Bombay tank. Incidentally, they never did find anything at General Harmon. Never found one trace of it.
Oh.
As far as I know, to this day, there's never been a trace found. None of the search planes did, and we had a lot of planes. That island was packed end to end with aircraft. You could hardly walk on it for the aircraft. And like I said, besides the task force was out there and all other kinds of ships that had been diverted. So we went and cranked the thing up the next morning to go back to Hickam. And I went to pivot a little bit on my right wheel to get back out onto the taxiway. And all of a sudden the left wing tipped and outboard propeller goes into the coral. And it's grinding away at coral. Well, immediately I hit the switches, cut the engines off. My co-pilot hit the button to get everybody out for the bell to evacuate the plane. They allowed the bell because we could see gas puddling under the engines down there of the wing tanks. And the first thing I did was to reach down for the gear handle. Well, the gear handle was in the right position, so the gear hadn't pulled up. We got out, and that main landing gear strut, the left landing gear, had bent back at about 45-degree angle, roughly. And the wheel, as big as his tires were, the wheel was buried down to the center of the hub in a hole. Well, the upshot of the whole thing is, this was a gas valve pit that the Japs had had on the island. The Navy thought they had them all plotted and put armor plate over them. There were a lot of them on there, but they had put armor plate on them. But this was one they didn't know about.
Oh.
And all this thing had was a tube of sixes covered with coral and oil. And that 65,000-pound airplane, when that wheel went over, it went on through. And so we had to sit up on Johnson Island for 2 weeks waiting for a board to come up from Hickam. And they flew up in a B-24, and that was the version that was a transport, which we flew back on. I'd never been in one of those, never even seen one before. It had portholes in the sides, you know. So anyway, the board had a hearing and everything. And the upshot of it was that we were exonerated of all blame. And in fact, I have a letter in my file that the Navy commander wrote, exonerating of us of the blame and taking the blame on the Navy, etc.
Hello again.
Hi. And when we came back up later, we staged through Johnson, refueled on Johnson. And because I flew a replacement plane up to Saipan, they had pushed that plane over the side. The center beam had twisted on it. And they had scavenged everything off of it and pushed it over the side. We walked out to the edge of the water. We could see it down in there. 16 hours that B-24 had on when we got it. And they'd taken everything out. Well, we'd taken all the life rafts and survival gear and the binoculars. We had 3 pairs of binoculars on there. 1 pair of Bauschelom and 2 pairs of what they call Square D. They were made by some small company during the war on the Bauschelom patent. And I often regretted I didn't get one of those pairs of binoculars, because I'm sure that some Navy officer got them on that island, that all that stuff was just surveyed and gone. But they'd taken all the instruments out of the plane, everything else. And, but that was about as near as I ever came to going down in the water on an aircraft. I was scared as hell, I'll tell you.
Yeah, I would be too.
So then we moved up from there to Saipan. And then we were assigned to the 11th Bomb Group, 42nd Squadron, 11th Bomb Group, 7th Air Force. And then we moved from there down to Guam.
When did you go to Saipan now? About when, do you recall?
February, March. Must have been. Must have been March.
Of 44, that would be?
Yeah. And the same way on Guam, because the invasion of Okinawa was in April, and we were the first heavy bomb group to go into Okinawa.
Now, did you support that invasion by bombing?
No, it was too far.
It was too far, okay.
We were bombing Truck, Marcus, and getting acclimated into the squadron, you know. used to bomb Marcus a lot. Marcus was a little 3 mile by 4 mile triangular shaped island that had, as I recall, they said 7 heavy anti-aircraft guns on it. And those guys could shoot those like you were shooting skeet. And we used to have to keep the runway cratered up there because that was the nearest point the Japanese could stage from the main islands or maybe even the Bonans down to Marcus and then bomb Guam, which was Sinkpak's headquarters, Nimitz's headquarters. And so we had to keep that runway neutralized as well as the runways of Truk and the anchorage of Truk. And of course we never did the damage to the ships in the anchorage of Truk that the Navy did, but it was something to be doing. But we used to get the hell shot out of us over at Marcus because those guys knew right where you had to be in the sky to drop your bombs. And when you leveled out on your IP, they would start shooting. And when you dropped your bombs, they would stop shooting and duck, go in the dugouts. And I mean, they had that sky just zeroed in like they had a grid painted up there. Our first mission over Marcus, we wound up with 10 holes in our plane. Another plane had 1 hole in it, flying the other wing of the flight leader, and cut the co-pilot's right leg off. And his nickname was Stumpy. He was a big, tall guy.
We're back on track now.
And, the second mission we flew over Marcus, which was about a week or so later. We've been to Truk in the meantime a couple of times. Second time, we were jumpy. I mean, we were tight as a goose up there. And we got to the IFP, and opened the bomb bay doors, lined up on the bomb line, and we were tense. They didn't fire a shot. Worst mission I ever flew. When I came off of there, the muscles in my legs were vibrating from tension. And my co-pilot was a guy from Texas, chewed tobacco all the time. Well, that's another story in itself. You fly along at night, all of a sudden you're half dozing while he's flying the airplane. All of a sudden he opens the side window to spit out, and all that noise hits you all of a sudden. You might go through the roof. Well, I got used to that this time. That happened in California one night. But he said after that he thought he was going to swallow his tobacco. But we didn't have a shot fired at us. That was the worst mission. And we had another mission up over there with the same crew that got the co-pilot wounded. And they had our executive officer, squadron exec, flying as co-pilot. And this was a good crew. This was a good pilot, a guy named Bean Blossom. And he had been an instructor pilot on 24s before he decided to go overseas. And Beanie was a good pilot, and his crew was good. And he had, we'd been all the way through training with him. He was flying one wing of the formation, we were flying the other. And we both got hit with flak over Marcus. And again, the closest any damage came to us was we found a piece of flak embedded in the instrument panel just behind the altimeter, I think it was, just behind one of the instruments. The crew chief found that had gone up there, but come right on through, but it probably wound up in my face. But it was a piece about 3 inches long, jagged metal. Bean Blossom's crew got hit, and they lost an engine, and that was a long distance up there. It was about a 10-hour flight We fly 5 hours heading 0, 5 hours back heading 180.
Now, you flew, when you were attacking Marcus, where did you fly from? Guam?
Guam.
Guam.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Fly to Harmon Field at Guam. It was later taken over by 29s.
Now, when you went into
Another
Marcus,
name earlier.
how many airplanes were in the attacking group?
We would fly about 12.
About 12. Was it
We would fly
necessary?
4 flights of 3.
Was it necessary to have fighter escort on that
No,
flight?
no fighter escort. They didn't have any fighters that would get down that far. And so this crew had to bail out.
Oh.
And I'll let you read the story after we're through here, because I have the complete story in a magazine that was put out during the war. And the flight engineer and the pilot were good friends, as were most of us with our flight engineers. My flight engineer and I were very good friends. In fact, my son visited him a couple of summers ago in Tulsa. And they were trying to get the plane back, but they were continually losing altitude. And so they decided, they sent out a mayday, and there was a Dumbo on its way. And then there was a lifeguard submarine that orbited Marcus, keeping an eye on it. And this lifeguard submarine took off for the spot, well, which was pretty courageous, because once he was away from Marcus, he was fair game for anybody, because he wasn't supposed to be anywhere else. And they bailed out, and Bean Blossom and the flight engineer were the last ones. And Beanie told the flight engineer, he says, "Let's go, Brego." He said, "All right, I'll go with you." So to bail out, we got down the bomb bay on the catwalk, and you rolled on out.
Mm-hmm.
Opened the bomb bay doors and rolled out. Helped open the bomb bay doors first. And
Made it easier. Well, wait, that's all right.
So Bean Blossom jumped, and Abrego didn't. And the mistake they made was, this was afternoon, late afternoon, and it was plenty of sunlight, but it was getting dark on the water. And they didn't realize this. And when the Dumbo got there, they all wound up in their life vest, and I don't think any of them wound up together. And in fact, one little guy, I think he was from Richmond, was the smallest man on the crew and the youngest. In fact, I think he lied, but he said he used to get in the service. He was real young, something like 17 years old or something. He treaded water for about 24 hours. And the Dumbo got up there, couldn't find them. Well, the lifeguard submarine came down and picked them all up the next day. Got every one of them out of the water. In the meantime, the flight engineer stayed with the plane, and you always gave your flight engineer some stick time, so in an emergency they could help fly the plane. Well, with those 9 men out of there, there was enough weight going so he could make it, the plane would stay airborne without losing a lot of altitude. So he flew that plane back. He missed Saipan, and he saw Tinian, which was just across the channel from Saipan. It was a big runway because we were getting ready for the B-29s to fly out of. And somehow he got the gear down, the flaps down, the whole routine, and lined up on the runway at Tinian, and this was night. And we never gave our engineers any night stick time. And he put that thing on the ground. And I don't know what the story says, but the story at that time was that he blew a tire and veered off into the infield, and there was a big pile of coral there where they had excavated, and ran into that, and the plane exploded and killed him. And this little magazine has this story in there, and it's called The Loneliest Flight of All.
Oh.
So I'll give it to you to read after.
Oh, yeah. Great. Super.
So then we went up to Okinawa, and we got to Okinawa. They were still fighting on both ends of the island. And we went and we were sent at Yantan airstrip. And that's where we flew our missions out of there.
Now, how many missions were you required to fly? In the early part of the war, they had to fly 25. You know, they set numbers. Did you?
Yeah, we had a minimum of 35. Most of the time was 40.
Okay.
Just depending on what time the war was.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
and looking at their pictures that I took of them at Halloween,
Oh.
there's something else.
Where's that little group from? I saw them the other day too, coming out.
There, I wave every day.
Great.
So we flew. It was 35 or 40 missions. It changed as the war
Yeah.
got longer. And
You had to fly 35 to.
to be rotated back.
Yeah. I want to say recycled. I don't think
Yeah.
that's quite the right
No,
word.
rotated.
Rotating.
And you know, at that time you were getting points for the number of days in theater and number of flights and all. And it had a point system to rotate back later after the war was over, and all these things counted, which was a bunch of baloney. But we were flying missions up over the home islands of Japan, and we flew missions over Nagasaki, and we flew missions over Yusa, which is a town in northern Honshu, USA, and that's where a lot of the things used to be made and sent over here, made in USA. They were made there,
Oh.
in Yusa.
Yusa. Okay. Oh yeah, I've heard. Yeah, I've heard that.
And we hit the big naval base at Kerry, and I never saw so much flak in my life as the Navy put up. Jap Navy gunners were the best gunners the Japs had. And their flak was all different colors. It was pink, it was yellow, it was orange, it was purple, where the Army gunners is always black. But the Navy had all colored. And we were after the battleship Haruna, I think, which is one I believe Colin Kelly is supposed to have sunk at the
Oh,
end
yeah.
of the war. Well, he didn't sink it. It was the effort that got him Congressional Medal, I think, but he stayed with his plane. But it was down by the stern in the Kerry Harbor, but it was still shooting like the devil. And, you know, this was a coordinated raid. The Navy came in of a task force out at sea. They came in low level, and then B-25s came over, and then the torpedo bombers, the dive bombers came down behind them, and then we came over with the 24s, and we were bombing from about 12,000 feet, which with a good-sized brick you can hit a 24, because most all the anti-aircraft were rated 10 to 12,000 feet, 75 millimeter, 120 millimeters all. And they had a lot of flak up in the sky that day. Of course, I don't know whether we hit anything. My bombardier said, yeah, we put a bomb on the after deck of the Haruna. I said, right. We had a 2,000-pound bomb hang up when it come out. So we had to drop that on our way back. And my bombardier and my engineer finally kicked it out. Literally, that's what you did. You just kicked it out of the toggles with your foot. You held on and you kicked this 2,000-pound bomb loose. And my tail gunner said it hit in the water right off this little island, right among a bunch of Japanese fishing boats. He says, I bet some Japanese are cussing us for a long while. We weren't aiming at them, certainly, but he said that's where it hit. He said they flew up a bunch of little Japanese fishing boats. But speaking of USA, we were flying a mission over USA on about the 6th of April. 26th of April, maybe. I've forgotten the date.
That's okay.
And we saw this big plume of smoke in the sky. I meant August, I'm sorry. I think it was about the 4th or 6th of August. And this was after the atomic bomb had been dropped on Hiroshima. And of course, before the bomb was dropped, you were warned away from the area, and we had been warned away on this day from Nagasaki to stay on the other coast, and so we'll up over USA. And as I recall, it was about 100 120 miles from Nagasaki, and we saw the cloud, and we knew what it was then, even though we didn't get word until later that the bomb had been dropped there. But we could see the amble-shaped cloud, or whatever they call it. Yeah, the mushroom cloud, and we knew what it was. But we could see it at that distance. It was that high up.
The other day when I was talking to you, we were talking, you said you went on this mission. You went up one coast of Japan, bombed in Korea, and came back.
Yeah.
Let's relate that to me.
This was a volunteer mission. You know, it was one of these deals where the squadron commander gets you in and he says, we need a volunteer for a mission. And I think my first words were, forget it. And he said, good, I'm glad you volunteered. So we flew a night mission loaded with incendiaries up the west coast of Japan and close enough to alert the air defenses, and bombed Fusan or Pusan, whichever they call it now. And they had a big harbor there, an island in the middle that I think had a power plant or something on it. And it was actually pretty well lit up at night. And we strayed incendiaries in a semicircle around that harbor. And then we got out of there quick. And we came back down the east coast of Japan and to alert the defenses there. And it was about a 15-hour and 55-minute flight, and we had 16 hours of gas aboard. When we got back into Okinawa, it was morning, and there was a squall over Yantan airfield. We couldn't land, and they sent us down to Machinado and said contact GCA. Well, like I told you the other day, I never heard of GCA except rumor. I'm not even sure that I knew what it meant. So they gave us a frequency and we contacted them. It was ground controlled approach. It was the first unit over there of that. And this controller talked us right on down through the squall that was over part of Machinado, but the runway was clear. And we finally broke out, and I was lined up with the runway. And just as we started to land there, my engineer says, we can't get the dome up, the radome that they installed on the plane. It also retracted, but it was down. It would have bounced along the ground if we'd have landed with it down. So I was in my final approach down pretty low. And I poured the coals to the thing. And without retracting the gear, we just made a big 360. In the meantime, he's cranking the radome up. And we leveled back off, lined up with the runway on final approach again. I was still in my turn. And my co-pilot was ready to grab the wheel, thinking I couldn't get it out of the turn. And we flipped the wings up. And it may sound like bragging, but I kissed that one in, boy. That was one of the best landings I think I ever made. And I barely got the wings level before both those wheels touched just easy. And we turned off the taxiway, and this was an A-20 strip, or an A-26, I forgot what it was lined up, but it was a medium bomber strip. It was pretty short. And when we stopped and turned off the taxiway, one of my engines cut off the gas. It was that close. And we also bombed China one night, Shanghai, on a single ship intruder mission. And that was a night of the first, that false VJ night they had, or the false victory night, whatever they call it. And we picked up, we got some hits on the plane that night. And we picked up San Francisco radio. And they're saying, the war is over, because we couldn't pick up Okinawa radio. And we were getting a skip distance thing.
Oh.
And my radio operator picking up San Francisco radio, and he motioned me to listen to it. The war is over, the war is over. And we're coming back with holes in the aircraft. And night fighters around all. I said, sure, right. Well, we were a pretty bitter bunch that night. And after the war, we flew prisoners of war from Japan back down to the Philippines. Most of those were Dutch native troops from the Dutch Indies, Borneo and Sumatra and stuff. And they had big camps out in the Philippines to rehabilitate these people. And we'd put seats in the bomb bays, ward seats. And those poor guys, we were at low altitude, and it was in August or September, October, I guess. And these poor guys are all in shorts and little skimpy shirts and short sleeve shirts and everything else. And even at 4,000 or 5,000 feet, it's pretty cold up there. And everybody in the group got all the blankets together we could, and old coats and everything we could give them, and put on these guys because they had to be seated in the bomb bay. And we used to carry about 20, I think, in the bomb bay, and fly back down to the Philippines. And,
did you fly all your 35 missions in B-24 Liberators then? And then you transitioned, you said later, in the B-25s.
yeah, I flew B-25s later.
Now, it was after the war?
Yeah, I didn't come back.
Now, were you involved in Korea at all?
No.
You didn't get called into Korea?
No, that was another funny deal. I was back at the Pentagon. But when I came back to the States, we came back to Fairfield Citizen Air Force Base out of Sacramento. We flew our plane back. And in fact, I just saw a letter the other night, some file, accepting the aircraft. This is a war-weary B-24, and the engineering officers accepted it and so forth.
Ah.
And we flew back, and I will forget, we all had scarves made out of parachutes, the white scarves, and all had these like big dodos. And as soon as we landed, my engineer pops the top hatch, and he's sitting up there with his head stuck out in the white scarf blowing in the breeze, real hot rock. And so then that's when they divided up the crews to send them home. And that's the last I saw some of my crew members, was when we all got split up there. And I have heard from all but two of them over the years. And my bombardier, who lives up somewhere in Pennsylvania, and my ball turret gunner I never heard from. But I did hear from all the others. My nose gunner was a golf pro. He died a few years back. My tail gunner just died 2 years ago. My engineer lives in Tulsa. My radar operator I visited. My navigator lives in Ohio. I went to his wedding after the war and would correspond. And my co-pilot I corresponded with for a while. I don't know where he is now. Last I heard it was some talk he was running guns down into Guatemala somewhere. I don't know what he's doing. But my ball turret gunner married into a lot of money. I never heard from him again. Down in Texas, he married into a well fortune.
Oh.
But
what was the relationship between the officers and the enlisted men on the airplane?
very good.
Very good?
Yes. They, of course, had a separate area. 6 of them and 4 officers and I. Well, on Guam, for example, we used to get a liquor ration, and we would get a fifth a week. And it could be the best bottle and bond liquor, or rum, or gin. Beer was hard to come by. And the enlisted men didn't get any liquor ration, of course. They got a beer ration, but they never got any liquor. Well, between the 4 officers, my bombardier and my co-pilot, and my navigator and I, we each, between 2 of us, we'd bought a case of liquor before we left California. before we left Seattle, I guess, and shipped it over in our foot lockers. Well, the Navy would have loved to have known that, you know,
Yeah.
but they didn't. And so when we got over there, we each had a case of liquor between we had 2 cases between the 4 of us. And none of us drank much liquor. We'd have an occasional drink. So every week when we got a liquor ration, and this was $1. Hi. Hello, Mr. Marshall. How are you? It was for $1.50. $1.25, I think. And then rum and gin was $1. And so each week, one of us would take a fifth of liquor over to our enlisted men. And so they always had it. And then, like I told you the other day, when we got this big load of lumber up on Okinawa, we had this whole big truckload of it, and we had enough for our enlisted men and us both to build a hut, and all the furniture and everything else in it. And my enlisted men used to make over there at that time, they would make squeezins. And they got a couple of big bottles from the photo lab, the big green glass bottles like you see water used to come in on water coolers. Mm-hmm. Clean them out, and they would get from the cooks, they would get some yeast. They'd get dried raisins or dried fruit of any kind and put it in these bottles and water and sugar and let it ferment and drink it. And it made a pretty decent drink. One night, they used to keep it under their hut floor. One night, one of the things exploded. They thought it had been bombed. There was that stuff all over the floor, under the floor, and it smelled like high heaven, you know. But we had very good rapport, is the word I guess they use today, but good relations with our enlisted men. We got along well, all of us. And when we were in their hut, I was EL to them. They would kid with me or with Tex, my co-pilot, or with Pop, my navigator. My navigator was the oldest man of the crew then. He was a first lieutenant before we were, because he had been with the infantry down in the Admiralties earlier in the war and had switched over to aviation.
How old was he?
He was probably about, I was 24, 23, 24, 24. He was probably 26, 27, because I was the next oldest. Yeah, because I think my radar operator was about the same age I was. But they could kid with us off duty and in their hut. But once we were in the airplane or anywhere else, there was no kidding. I mean, it was strictly an officer and enlisted man relationship. But we had a big court-martial one time of them. They hadn't shown up for PT on Guam when they were supposed to. It was in formation. They were supposed to fall out for PT in the morning. They hadn't. And the major called me on the carpet about it. So I said, well, let's give them extra guard duty. Well, our executive officer then was a real stickler. He was coming back from a date with a nurse, I think, and he decided to inspect the guards. Well, he found one of my guys curled up under the plane sleep. There's no sense to have guards on the planes down there anyway. It was ridiculous. And he found another one in a barrel or something. He was sleeping. And I forget what the other two were doing. They were playing cards somewhere or something. But they all came up for court-martial. They all got busted down a rank. Well, before the end of the war, they were all back up to what they would have been anyway. But that was my first experience with a court-martial. I felt real bad about that. I have a letter at home that my tail gunner, who I said just died a couple of years ago, his mother wrote me thanking me for taking care of him, you know, because this fellow was the youngest guy on my crew, he was about 17 years old. And that George had written and said he understood about the court-martial. He didn't hold any grudge against me for that court-martial. It was their fault. They shouldn't have been doing what they were doing, et cetera, and so forth. So and I corresponded with him and his wife, he and his wife.
One thing before I forget, because we were talking about yesterday, when you were on Okinawa, how you saved the airplanes in the typhoon, I guess they call them over there.
Oh yeah. Well, we set through 2 or 3 typhoons, but the big one was right at the end of the war there, just near the end of the war. And that's the one that sank a bunch of Navy ships, capsized a destroyer, and I forget the name of that one now. It just, I've forgotten the name. I get it mixed up with Hazel and all these we've had around here, you know, hurricanes and so forth. But this was a wicked, the worst typhoon they've had in years over there. And we sat in the plane, the co-pilot and pilot and engineer, to keep the plane engines running all night. And you kept the controls pushed forward to keep the nose down. And it was tied down too, cable down. But the winds were so strong, 165 to 175 mile an hour winds, that it could have tilted those planes up. But that was a long night too. And a lot of aircraft were damaged. A lot of damage on the island. I saw a freighter that, I was just trying to compare it with something today, but a good-sized ocean-going freighter, not Queen Mary type, you know, not anything big like that, but almost the size of what the attack transport that we went over on was. And it was down at Naha, capital Okinawa. It was across the road, the highway road, up on a hill. And it was there when the war was over, and the last time we were down that way, it was still there.
Just blew it right up?
It blew it right in over the water. The water must have been so high down there, and it deposited up on this hill, and that's where it was left. It was just a rusted steel hulk, last I saw of it, all orange and everything. But we came back in November. I had a chance to fly for Chinese Airlines over there. They were signing up people. And I mean, they were giving big money. And I was really tempted. But then I was supposed to get married when I got back, so I said, better not. And I could have gone with Far East Air Forces in the occupation of Japan. And you mentioned Korean War. When I came home, I had 30 days leave, I think. And I got married on the 15th of December. And we went on our honeymoon to New York for a week. Came back, spent Christmas here. Then I had to leave for North Carolina, Greensboro. And my wife went with me, and we lived in a hotel down there for about 3 weeks, but there was no housing. And that was just another kill time until we find something to do with you. And from there, we were sent to Ellington Air Force Base at Houston, and we lived in a room there in Houston for a bit, and then we lived down in the housing development at Galveston, and had cockroaches about 6 inches long in the housing development. My wife had never seen a cockroach in a house before that she lived in. She about went ape. We lived at Galveston. I flew Out of Ellington, I flew Navigators and C-47s, B-25s, and whatever they were flying, put in time. Then we were sent from there up to Chanute Field, Illinois. And we were all pilots in this group was sent. And so while we were there, there was another couple that had traveled with us that I'd been overseas with and trained with out in California. And he was just newly married too while he was on leave. So the four of us traveled together and got up to Chanute, and we had a room in a house with a fellow who was back from ETO. He'd been a captain in chemical warfare and got married, had a wife and little girl there. He was going to university. So they had a room that we rented. And we had a nice time there. So we came home on leave at Easter. And I guess this was Easter of 46. We were married December 45. And we were home at Easter. We got back and there was a note waiting in the room for me. Call Roger immediately. So I called him. He said, you better get packed. He said, we're going back to San Antonio. Well, there was this note that we were going back to San Antonio right away. Well, we had visited over San Antonio while we were at Galveston. There wasn't a place to be had to live in over there. And we were thinking about sending my wife back home, or both the wives back home, going there, you know. So while I was home here on leave, a buddy of mine, Air Force, was stationed at the Pentagon. And he told me at the time, well, why don't you come get back over here in the Pentagon? I'll get you a spot. And I told him, I said, get it, Johnson, I don't want to be in the Pentagon. I want to be with a flying unit. He said, well, anytime you want to get back here, you just let me know. Well, I got to thinking about it, and I didn't feel like going back to San Antonio and without my wife, you know, newly married and so forth. So I called my father, and he in turn called this buddy of mine. And the next morning when I went out to the base commander called me in. And he says, Crouch, who do you know in Washington? A lot of people. I'm from there, sir. He says, well, I've just got to order a TWX to send you back to Washington immediately. Report to the Pentagon. But he's gotten us through, and they've wired it first thing in the morning, you know. So we packed up and we came back to Washington, and I was assigned to the Pentagon for about a year and a half, I guess. And I did a lot of flying out of Bowling and Andrews, and I checked out B-51s, and I checked out, well, I flew more B-25s, and I don't know, I flew some other stuff, odds and ends. And the last time I flew, in fact, I flew B-51 out over Soldiers Field in an All-Star football game. And that was, what, 49 or 50, what is that? And the rumor came out of the Pentagon that they were going to force everybody out that hadn't made regular Army. Or regular Air Force, I guess, at that time. I think we switched over to Air Force. And I thought, oh, good Lord, we're going to be forced out, because I hadn't even taken the test for the regular Air Force. This buddy of mine did and got accepted. Also, I have another buddy that never did, and he finally retired after 20 out of the Pentagon. They never did do this thing. But that they were going to put everybody out. That was the rumor. So I thought, well, oh, I've got enough points to get out and everything. I might as well get out and get a job before the rush starts. So I got out. Well, in a sense, that was one of the biggest mistakes I ever made, because I really loved the Air Force. But I would have been back in Japan the time the Korean War started, because I was about due to be shipped out of the Pentagon. And at that time, you weren't getting your choice of spots where you want to go. They sent you back to the theater that you came from.
Oh.
So I'd have been with the Far Eastern Air Force in Japan just about the time the Korean War broke. And I could have been nose down in some Korean hill at this time, too. But, funny thing, I was working, and I tried to get into the Air National Guard here. They had a P-51 outfit, and which later converted to F-86s and so forth. That's a good fighter squadron they had here. I still have a good fighter squadron. So, I think it's 121st Fighter Group. And I had two good friends in it. One of them was a squadron navigating officer, and one was a pilot. And so they took me to a meeting one night, and I was interested in joining. Not as a fighter pilot, but I knew they had auxiliary aircraft. I knew they had a couple of C-47s, a couple of B-25s. And so the skipper of this outfit was a colonel. I can't think of his name right now, but then I can't remember my name from yesterday sometimes. And he was a hot pilot. He has the RAF wings on one side, you know. And if you didn't believe he was a hot pilot, all he'd do was ask him to tell you. But he did. He set a record from here to Chicago in a P-51, a speed record, and another one across the Atlantic to England or something. Anyway, he says, well, you know, you don't have any P-51 fighter time. I said, no. I said, I've checked out on them. I've got some hours. I said, but no, nothing, no combat time. He said, well, he said, we'll just have to get back to you. He said, we really don't need you now. I said, okay, Colonel, I understand that. I said, I just thought maybe you might need a pilot for these multi-engine aircraft that you have. I said, because I have time in all of those. Well, we'll get back to you. I said, okay. Well, I knew that was the end of that. Well, the Korean War started. And I get Milliken was his name. He was later general. And I got this call. We've reconsidered, and would you be interested in joining the 121st? Well, in the meantime, I had lunch with this friend of mine in the Pentagon, and he told me the 121st was going to be called up pretty quick. And I said, forget that stuff. And so I told him, I said, well, Colonel, I said, no, I said, I've reconsidered. He said, why? I thought you were interested in joining. I said, well, I was. I said, but I hear now that you guys are going to be called up pretty good, pretty quick. Oh, he said, that's just a rumor. I said, yeah. I said, well, the rumor I got was right from the Pentagon. He said, well, he says, even if we are, he says, we'll only go up to Dover Air Force Base and replace the unit there. He said, we'll stay together up there as a group. I said, oh, come on, Colonel. I said, I've been in the Air Force long enough to know that this is a bunch of baloney. I said, you don't have any idea where you're going to be or how long you're going to be or what you're going to status is or anything else. Oh, he says, I got the word over the Pentagon. He says, I've got their word for that. Well, 121st was called up about 2 weeks later. They were sent up to Dover, Delaware for about 3 weeks for equipment, and then they were split up and sent all over Korea. They didn't stay together as a group 20 minutes. These two buddies of mine went in different fighter outfits over there as replacement pilots. They didn't stay together at all. I know he was trying to bird dog me about that, but but I really did. I enjoyed every minute of my stay in the Air Force.
You didn't stay in the reserve?
I stayed in the reserve, yeah. And that was, I stayed in the reserve, and I was in the active reserve. We were flying for a bit. Then they took out your flying status. You only flew on the 2 weeks active duty every year. Then they cut out the flying on that. And the last 2 weeks active duty time I put in was at the Reserve Center to write emergency procedures in case of nuclear attack, in case of fire, in case of anything else. They didn't even, my secondary MOS, AFSC now, was as an operations officer. And all the guys in my outfit in the reserve were rated officers, pilots, bombardiers, navigators. And we all passed the course as operations officers. We took a long course in that. But do you think they would assign us as an operations officer for our 2 weeks anywhere, or assistant operations officer? No. I sit over in the center writing up emergency procedures in case of nuclear attack, in case of fire, in case of flood. So this got harder and harder every 2 years, every 2 weeks a year to really do anything worthwhile. And finally we had some major personnel officer over there. She was a woman. And she and I had a disagreement one day. And I said, I've had enough. I said, forget it. I said, put me on inactive status. I'm finished. And I had about 18 years by that time. It was my reserve time. Mm-hmm. And people say, well, you're crazy. You should have stayed in for 20. Well, of course I should have stayed in for 20. I have buddies now that are retired and going to go to retirement after 20. But you see, my father died at 50 years old. And for years I was firmly convinced that I wouldn't live beyond 50, 51 years old. Yeah. And I didn't figure I was going to need any retirement. So that never entered in my head to stay in for retirement purposes. But I had a wife and at that time 2 little kids. And they took me away, for 2 weeks in the summer and took me away a night a week and so forth. Which is, that part was all right because I made some good friends in there. But the reserve at that time, what irked me so much about it, every time you turn around they were trying to get you off active status. They were trying to get you out of the reserve or out of the Air Force. And I just got fed up with trying to hang in there. Yeah. But, and they didn't have any flying outfit here, any reserve. Well, later they have a troop carrier outfit here, which I would have loved if they'd had it at the time to belong to. And because they flew 4-engine prop planes, and then later they had star lifters and so forth. So, Globemasters, I forget which. Globemasters, I guess. And I would have loved to have flown, but they didn't have that at that time. And reserve was just a hassle. Where the Navy Reserve, on the other hand, had great units here, good flying units. I had friends in one of them, and they had good flying units. But the Air Force goofed off on their reserves around here, anyway. But I was sorry. I've regretted many times that I got out of the Air Force. Friends of mine. I have a couple of buddies that didn't have as much combat time, or in fact one didn't have any overseas time at all. He wound up brigadier general. One was brigadier general. And I assume I wound up a lieutenant colonel. I'm not sure. I was a major when I got out of the reserve, and about 2 years later, I get a notice from Denver. You're being considered, your name has been put up for the board for promotion to lieutenant colonel. I thought, this has been ridiculous. I've been on off active status for 2 years. So I wrote him back. I said, I'm on inactive status. So then, but 2 months later, 3 months later, I get back this letter. You've been passed over for promotion to lieutenant colonel. You will be, your name will be put forth on the next promotion board. I thought, well, this is ridiculous. So then about 6 months or a year, I forgot what, I got another letter. You've been promoted to lieutenant.